A chilling line implying the boss has already lost control. No one noticed when she stopped walking. The restaurant was loud in the way expensive places always were. Soft jazz sliding through hidden speakers, crystal glasses chiming gently against polished wood, low conversations layered over one another like static. The kind of place where money insulated people from consequence. She stood beside the table, tray balanced against her hip, waiting. The men didn't look at her. They were too busy laughing. 5 of them. All Korean. All dressed in dark suits that cost more than her monthly rent. The kind of suits that didn't wrinkle no matter how long you sat in them. The kind that told the world you were used to being obeyed. At the center of the table sat Kong Min-jae, the boss. He hadn't touched his drink in 10 minutes. Not because he didn't like it, because he didn't have to rush. Everything in his life came to him eventually. People, power, answers, including service. She cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said. Min-jae lifted one finger without looking at her. A subtle command. Wait. She did. Her arm didn't shake. Her expression didn't change. She stood there like part of the furniture. Present, functional, invisible. One of the men to Min-jae's left finally glanced up. His eyes flicked over her uniform, her shoes, the name stitched onto her apron. Nia. He smirked. "You're blocking the light," he said, waving his hand like he was brushing away smoke. "Move." She stepped back immediately. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, professional. Min-jae finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He spoke in Korean, low enough that nearby diners wouldn't hear. "Why do restaurants hire girls who don't belong here?" he said. "It ruins the atmosphere." The men chuckled. "She probably can't even understand you," another added. "Look at her." Min-jae smiled faintly. He enjoyed moments like this. Not the cruelty itself, but the certainty. The knowledge that no one in the room would challenge him. Especially not the waitress. "She's just here to carry things," he said, still in Korean. "Not to think." Nia stood there with her eyes lowered, hands folded neatly in front of her tray. She understood every word. She reached forward and topped off Min-jae's glass. The amber liquid caught the candlelight, glowing warm and harmless. No one noticed her thumb brush the edge of the coaster. No one noticed the folded receipt resting beneath it. Min-jae lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and leaned back again. "See," he said. Perfectly obedient. The men laughed. That was when she spoke. Quietly. Soft enough that it sounded like a mistake. Like something meant for herself. 7 words, spoken in flawless Korean. Min-jae's smile didn't vanish right away. At first, it tightened. Then it stalled completely, like a machine seizing mid-motion. He lowered his glass slowly. The man beside him noticed first. "Boss." Min-jae didn't respond. He stared at the table, eyes fixed on the space where the coaster sat. His jaw flexed once. Just once. Nia straightened. For the first time since approaching the table, she lifted her head. Their eyes met. Min-jae felt something unfamiliar slide into his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. "You," he said, switching to English. His voice was even. Too even. "What did you say?" She didn't repeat herself. She simply met his gaze and gave a small, polite nod, the same nod she gave every customer. "I'll bring the check when you're ready," she said. Then she turned and walked away. The men stared after her, confused. "What was that about?" one asked. Min-jae didn't answer. He reached beneath the table, fingers closing around the receipt. His eyes scanned it once. Then again. His grip tightened. Around them, the restaurant carried on, unaware. The jazz band shifted into a new song. A server laughed near the bar. Someone dropped a fork. Min-jae slowly pushed his chair back. Too slowly. He stood. By the time he realized what the 7 words actually meant. By the time he understood who had just spoken them. The waitress was already gone, and so was his control. Nia hadn't planned on working the late shift that night. She usually avoided it when she could. The tips were better, but the customers were louder, drunker, and more demanding. Men who believed money gave them permission to look too long, to speak too freely. But one of the servers had called out sick, and the manager had given her that look, the one that wasn't really a request. So she tied her apron, tucked her hair back, and stepped onto the floor like she always did. Invisible. Efficient. Forgettable. The restaurant was called Lotus Room, a place built on illusion. Soft lighting. Imported wood. White tablecloths that never seemed to stain no matter how many drinks were spilled. Everything about it whispered exclusivity, even though most of the money that passed through its doors came from people who didn't want their names attached to it. Nia fit the role perfectly. She had learned early that people spoke freely around those they didn't consider a threat. She'd learned it growing up in cramped apartments where arguments happened in the open because no one bothered to lower their voice around a child. She'd learned it later in hospital waiting rooms, sitting quietly while doctors discussed outcomes like she wasn't sitting 3 feet away. People talked when they thought you didn't matter. So she made herself small. She moved through the dining room with practiced ease, memorizing orders, avoiding eye contact unless required, keeping her voice soft. Customers liked her because she didn't intrude. Managers liked her because she didn't complain. And men like Kong Min-jae didn't notice her at all. She first saw his table an hour into the shift. It was impossible not to. 5 men seated around a circular table near the center of the room. The best location. The kind of placement you didn't ask for, you were given. The energy around them was different. Not loud. Not flashy. Controlled. Dangerously calm. Nia recognized it immediately, even if she didn't know why yet. They weren't celebrating. They weren't relaxing. They were waiting. Min-jae sat with his back straight, shoulders relaxed, one arm draped casually over the chair beside him. He didn't scan the room the way paranoid men did. He didn't need to. The room adjusted to him. Servers approached carefully. Other diners glanced over, then quickly looked away. Even the manager lingered near the bar, pretending to review receipts while keeping the table in his peripheral vision. Nia had served men like him before. Not exactly like him, but close enough. Men whose money wasn't clean. Men whose politeness felt rehearsed. She didn't know he was Korean Mafia when she first saw him. She just knew he was dangerous. When she approached the table for the first time, one of the men cut her off before she could finish her greeting. Water. Now. No eye contact. She nodded and returned moments later, placing the glasses down with measured precision. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. Min-jae watched her hands, not her face. She noticed that, too. He spoke quietly to the man beside him in Korean. Nia caught only fragments as she turned away. Too public. Tonight. She won't interfere. The words meant nothing on their own. But the tone did. She felt it then. A faint tightening in her chest. The kind of instinct that didn't scream, but whispered. Pay attention. She dismissed it. People said strange things in restaurants all the time. Business deals. Affairs. Arguments. It wasn't her place to listen. She returned to her other tables, letting the rhythm of work settle her. Orders. Refills. Apologies. Smiles. Normal. Ordinary. Safe. Then she overheard him again. This time by accident. She was clearing a nearby table when Min-jae leaned forward, his voice low, controlled, threaded with something sharp beneath it. Position confirmed, he said. Another man replied. No mistakes. Min-jae nodded once. There won't be. Nia's hand paused mid-motion. Just for a second. She kept her head down. Continued wiping the table. Her heart picked up its pace, though she didn't know why. She told herself she was imagining it. But the red flags kept stacking up. The untouched drinks. The way two of the men kept their backs to the wall. The way another hadn't ordered anything in over an hour. This wasn't a business dinner. This was something else. She stole a glance toward the bar. The man seated there hadn't moved since she clocked in. His glass was still full. His eyes weren't on the television. They were on Min-jae's table. Her pulse quickened. Nia swallowed and forced herself to breathe slowly. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't security. She was just a waitress. That's what everyone thought. She glanced at Min-jae again. This time, he looked back. Their eyes met briefly. Not long enough to be rude, but long enough for her to feel it. Assessment. Min-jae wasn't looking at her as staff. He was looking at her as a variable. Her stomach tightened. She broke eye contact immediately and stepped away, pretending to adjust a setting at another table. Her mind raced. She replayed the fragments she'd heard. The posture. The stillness. And suddenly, the word formed fully in her head. Hit. She didn't know who. She didn't know when. But she knew something was about to happen. And for the first time that night, Nia realized. She wasn't just invisible in this room. She was standing in the middle of something she was never meant to hear. Min-jae decided to make an example of her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his hand on the table. Men like him never needed theatrics. Power worked best when it was quiet. Nia, he said, reading her name off the apron as she approached again. He pronounced it wrong on purpose. Stretched the vowel. Flattened the consonants. She stopped beside the table. Yes, sir. He leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. The men around him followed his lead, relaxing into their seats like spectators settling in for a show. You took a long time with the water, he said in English. Calm. Mild. Is the kitchen struggling tonight? No, sir, she replied. I apologize. He smiled faintly, then switched to Korean. She apologizes very well, he said. That's something. The men laughed softly. Nia didn't react. Her eyes stayed lowered, her posture respectful. Min-jae watched her closely now. Tell me, he continued in Korean, do you understand what I'm saying? She hesitated. Just long enough to make the answer believable. No, she said quietly. I don't speak Korean. A lie. A clean one. Min-jae studied her face. He was good at spotting cracks, micro-expressions, flinches, hesitation. He saw none. Interesting. Good, he said, still in Korean. Then this won't embarrass you. One of the men snorted. Min-jae leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice dropping just enough that it carried only to those seated around him. This place hires people who don't belong, he said. People who think wearing black and white makes them part of the room. Nia's jaw tightened for half a second. Min-jae noticed. There's a difference between being present, he continued, and being seen. He gestured vaguely toward her with 2 fingers. Not pointing. Dismissing. You, he said in English now, are very forgettable. The words hung in the air. Nearby diners glanced over, uncomfortable. A few servers slowed their steps, sensing tension but not daring to intervene. Nia felt heat rise behind her eyes. She swallowed it down. I'm sorry if I've done something wrong, she said evenly. Min-jae smiled again. A predator's smile. The kind that showed no teeth. You haven't done anything wrong, he said. You've done exactly what's expected. He waved her away. Go. She turned to leave. Wait, he added. She stopped. Yes, sir. He picked up his glass, swirled the liquid, then set it down untouched. This, he said, tapping the rim, is warm. I can replace it. Do. She reached for the glass. Min-jae suddenly tightened his grip on it, holding it in place. Their fingers brushed. The contact was deliberate. His voice dropped again, back into Korean. "You should be careful," he said softly. "Accidents happen to people who listen too much." Nia's breath caught. Just for a fraction of a second. Min-jae felt it. Satisfied, he released the glass. She took it and walked away, her steps measured, her back straight. Inside, her heart was racing. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't arrogance. That was a warning. She replaced the drink at the bar, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. She forced herself to breathe. Forced herself not to look back. But she felt his gaze on her the entire time. When she returned with the fresh glass, Min-jae was speaking again, his tone lighter now, almost amused. "She doesn't even know," he said in Korean. "That's the best part." The men chuckled. Nia placed the drink down gently. "Is there anything else I can get you?" she asked. Min-jae looked up at her. This time, his eyes were sharp. "No," he said. "That will be all." She nodded and turned away. 3 steps. 4. 5. Then she heard him again. "So disposable," he said, not bothering to lower his voice this time. "People like her disappear every day. No one notices." The words hit her like a slap. She stopped walking. Just for a moment. The room seemed to hold its breath. Nia turned back. Slowly. Min-jae raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Yes?" he asked. "Did I forget to dismiss you?" She met his gaze. Her voice was calm. Steady. "No, sir," she said. "I just wanted to be sure." "Be sure of what?" She smiled. Not apologetic. Not afraid. A small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That you'll still be here when I come back with the check." The table went quiet. Min-jae stared at her. For the first time since she'd approached, something flickered across his expression. Not anger. Curiosity. Nia turned and walked away before he could respond. She reached into her apron as she moved, her fingers brushing against the folded receipt she'd been carrying all night. The one she hadn't planned to use. Yet. Min-jae watched her go, his jaw tightening slightly. She wasn't reacting the way she was supposed to. And that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Nia didn't return to the floor right away. She stood in the service hallway behind the bar, one hand resting against the cool metal shelving, breathing slowly until the pounding in her chest settled into something manageable. The noise of the restaurant faded here, muted voices, distant clinks, the low hum of refrigeration units. This was the space between. Where servers hid to cry. Where mistakes were swallowed. Where people pretended nothing followed them out of the dining room. She had learned to stand still in places like this. But tonight, stillness felt dangerous. Min-jae's voice replayed in her mind, not the words, but the confidence behind them. The way he'd said people like her disappear every day as if it were a fact, not a threat. She had heard threats before. This one was different. Because it wasn't meant for her. It was meant for the men around him. And she wasn't supposed to understand it. Nia closed her eyes. She remembered her grandmother's voice, years ago, soft but firm. "Never let them know what you hear." Her grandmother had taught her Korean in whispers. Late nights. Old stories. Language as survival, not heritage. Nia had kept it hidden her entire adult life. Tonight, it had nearly betrayed her. She opened her eyes and stepped back onto the floor. The table was still there. Still waiting. Still calm. Min-jae sat exactly as before, speaking in low tones, his head inclined toward the men beside him. The others leaned in now, their posture subtly altered. Less relaxed. More alert. Whatever was coming had moved closer. Nia approached a neighboring table, pretending to refill water. From the corner of her eye, she watched Min-jae's mouth move. She listened. "Confirmed 10 minutes ago," one of the men said. Nia's grip tightened around the pitcher. Min-jae replied, too late to change locations. Another voice cut in. What about collateral? Min-jae didn't hesitate. No witnesses. Nia's heart dropped. She turned slightly, angling her body so her face remained hidden. What about the staff? Someone asked. Min-jae's response came immediately. They don't see. They don't hear. And if they do, he paused. They forget. A chill crawled up her spine. They weren't just planning something violent. They were planning it here. Tonight. She forced herself to keep breathing. The conversation continued, fragmented but clear enough now that she was listening for it. Positions already set. Signal when he arrives. No mistakes. Nia pieced it together slowly, unwillingly. This wasn't a deal. This was an execution. And it wasn't happening in some alley or warehouse where violence belonged. It was happening in a room full of people who thought they were safe. Her eyes scanned the restaurant instinctively. The bar. The entrance. The man who hadn't moved all night. The target wasn't at the table. He was coming. Her mouth went dry. If she walked away, she could finish her shift. Clock out. Go home. Pretend none of this had ever happened. She wasn't law enforcement. She wasn't security. She wasn't anyone important. Just a waitress. And waitresses survived by staying invisible. But if she stayed silent, she pictured the room erupting into chaos. Screams. Gunshots. Blood on white tablecloths. She imagined the staff, the cook who slipped her extra fries on slow nights, the bartender who walked her to her car after closing, caught in the middle. Collateral. Her pulse quickened. She moved away from the table, her mind racing. Time was tightening around her now. Every glance at the door felt heavier. Every second that passed brought the unknown closer. She could warn the manager. But what would she say? I overheard a mafia hit in Korean? No proof. No credibility. She could call the police. And say what? Trust me. She could run. But the thought made her stomach turn. Because running didn't erase what she knew. And knowledge, once acquired, didn't disappear. She returned to the service hallway again, her thoughts spiraling. If Min-jae suspected she understood him. If he already suspected. Her hand brushed against her apron. The folded receipt was still there. She hadn't meant to pick it up earlier. It had been instinct. Something to ground her. Something physical. She unfolded it slowly. The blank side stared back at her. She thought of Min-jae's eyes when she'd spoken those 7 words earlier. The way his confidence had faltered, just slightly. He had underestimated her. That was her leverage. And also her risk. If she acted, she put herself directly in his line of sight. If she didn't, she became complicit. Her chest tightened. This wasn't bravery. This was inevitability. She looked back toward the table. Min-jae glanced at his watch. Nia's breath hitched. Whatever was coming was close. She smoothed the receipt on the counter, her fingers trembling now despite her effort to steady them. She picked up a pen from behind the bar. This wasn't part of her job. This wasn't her responsibility. But no one else in the room knew what she knew. She wrote quickly. Not everything. Not explanations. Just enough. A warning. Her heart pounded as she folded the receipt again, smaller this time. Concealable. She tucked it back into her apron and stepped out from the hallway. Min-jae was mid-sentence when he noticed her approaching. He looked up. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, the noise of the restaurant faded again. This time, there was no mistaking it. He was watching her carefully now. Nia felt the weight of that folded paper against her side. Once she handed it over, there would be no going back. No invisibility. No pretending she hadn't heard. She walked toward the table anyway. Nia approached the table the same way she always did. Head slightly bowed. Steps measured. Expression neutral. Nothing about her movement suggested urgency. That was the point. Min-jae noticed her immediately. Not because she was loud, but because she wasn't. People who were afraid rushed. People who were guilty hesitated. She did neither. Check? One of the men asked without looking at her. In a moment, Min-jae said. His eyes stayed on her face as she stopped beside the table. Up close, the air around him felt heavier, controlled, sharp. Yes, he said. Nia placed the leather check holder on the edge of the table. She didn't slide it forward. She didn't open it. She simply rested her fingers on top. Min-jae glanced down, then back up at her. I didn't ask for this yet, he said. I know, she replied softly. Her voice was steady. Too steady. Min-jae's brow furrowed slightly. Nia leaned in just enough that her shadow crossed the tablecloth. Just enough that only he could hear her. Your man at the bar, she said quietly, in perfect Korean, is watching the wrong door. Min-jae's expression didn't change. Not immediately. He exhaled through his nose, amused. Then he laughed. A soft, dismissive sound. You shouldn't joke like that, he said in English. You'll scare yourself. She straightened. I'm not joking. One of the men shifted in his seat. Boss. Min-jae waved him off without looking. Nia's fingers slid the check holder forward a few inches. Min-jae opened it absently. Inside was the receipt. Folded. He barely glanced at it before closing the folder again. That's enough, he said, his tone polite but final. Go back to work. Nia didn't move. The silence stretched. Min-jae's eyes hardened. You're testing my patience, he said. She met his gaze. No, she said. I'm testing your timing. That earned her a reaction. Min-jae's smile vanished. He stared at her now, openly assessing, measuring, weighing. What timing? He asked. Nia lowered her voice again. The man you're waiting for, she said. He's already here. Min-jae almost smiled again. Almost. You think I don't know my own operation? He asked in Korean. I think, she replied, you're about to lose control of it. One of the men stood abruptly. Boss, this is. Sit, Min-jae snapped. The man obeyed. Min-jae leaned back in his chair, studying her as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to solve tonight. You're very confident, he said. For someone who doesn't belong in this conversation. Nia nodded once. That's why you missed it. Missed what? Min-jae opened the check holder again, this time slowly. He unfolded the receipt. His eyes scanned the words. Just a few lines. Sparse. Cryptic. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked up. Nia had already stepped back. What is this? He asked. She didn't answer. She turned to leave. Min-jae reached out instinctively, grabbing her wrist. Not hard. Not gentle. A claim. She stopped. The room felt suddenly smaller. Finish your thought, he said quietly. Nia turned back to him. Her eyes were calm. Resigned. You told your men no witnesses, she said. You were wrong. Min-jae released her wrist slowly. His fingers lingered in the air for a moment after she pulled away. Get out of my sight, he said. She walked away. This time, she didn't look back. The men at the table spoke all at once. What the hell was that? She's bluffing. Should we move? Min-jae didn't respond. He unfolded the receipt again. Read it carefully now. The words hadn't changed, but the weight of them had. He glanced toward the bar. The man sitting there met his eyes, and then, subtly, looked away. Min-jae's pulse quickened. He scanned the room, the entrance, the hallway, the servers moving between tables. Everything looked the same. That was the problem. He folded the receipt slowly. Too slowly. What did she say? One of the men asked. Min-jae didn't answer. For the first time that night, doubt crept in. Small. Unwelcome. But real. He reached for his phone under the table. No signal. The music shifted again. Somewhere near the entrance, the door opened. Min-jae looked up. And this time, he didn't smile. Min-jae didn't stand up right away. That was the first mistake. He remained seated, posture relaxed, fingers loosely interlaced on the table as if nothing had changed. Around him, the restaurant continued its low, elegant hum. Conversations rose and fell. Silverware clinked. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed too loudly. Normal. That's what Min-jae clung to. Normal meant control. She's trying to scare you, one of the men said quietly. A nobody playing games. Min-jae nodded once, slowly. Yes, he said. That's exactly what this is. He said it with conviction. Enough that the men around him relaxed slightly, reassured by his certainty. Min-jae had built his reputation on reading people. On knowing when fear was real and when it was manufactured. And waitresses didn't scare men like him. Still, he reached for his phone again. No signal. That annoyed him. He slid it back into his pocket, careful not to let anyone see the tension creep into his shoulders. Where did she go? He asked. One of the men gestured toward the service hallway. Back there. Min-jae's eyes narrowed. She's bold, another said. Too bold. Or stupid, Min-jae replied. He stood then, straightening his jacket with deliberate calm. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, reassuring. People like her test boundaries, he said. They think proximity to power gives them leverage. He smiled faintly. It doesn't. He nodded to the man nearest the aisle. Follow her. Quietly. The man rose without a word and slipped away. Min-jae turned his attention back to the receipt in his hand. He unfolded it again. The message was still infuriatingly brief. No names. No details. Just implications. Too vague to panic over. Too specific to ignore. He told himself that was the trick. Fear thrived on ambiguity. He would remove it. That's what he always did. In the service hallway, Nia was stacking plates she didn't need to stack. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding them while her thoughts raced ahead of her. She knew he wouldn't let it go. Men like Min-jae never did. She felt his presence before she saw him. The air shifted. Footsteps slowed behind her. Miss, a voice said. She turned. One of Min-jae's men stood a few feet away, blocking the exit back to the floor. His expression was polite. His eyes were not. The boss would like a word. Nia nodded. Of course. She didn't ask where. She already knew. Min-jae waited near the bar, his reflection faintly visible in the mirrored shelves behind the bottles. When he saw her approach, he smiled. You move fast, he said. Almost like you're trying to disappear. I'm working, she replied. He gestured to a quiet corner near the wine racks. Less visible. Less public. She followed. This ends now, Min-jae said calmly. You misunderstand your position. Nia looked at him. I know exactly where I stand. No, he said. You think you do. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You overheard something you shouldn't have. You imagined patterns that don't exist. That happens to people who want attention. She didn't respond. He mistook her silence for uncertainty. Here's what will happen, he continued. You'll forget tonight. You'll go home. Tomorrow, this is just a strange story you don't tell anyone. Nia's jaw tightened. And if I don't? She asked. Min-jae's smile thinned. Then you become a problem, he said. And problems get solved. The threat was clear now. He waited for fear. For pleading. For retreat. Nia met his gaze instead. You should leave, she said quietly. Min-jae laughed. A short, sharp sound. Leave, he repeated. This is my night. He straightened, confidence returning in full. I built this, he said. I know every variable, every risk. He glanced toward the entrance. Nothing is happening unless I allow it. That was the arrogance. The belief that knowledge equaled omniscience. That control, once established, couldn't be lost. Nia said nothing. Min-jae took her silence as surrender. Good, he said. Then we understand each other. He turned back toward his table. That was the decision. The moment he chose not to act. Not to move. Not to change course. Not to listen. He returned to his seat, signaling the men to relax. She's done, he said. Finish your drinks. The man who had followed her returned and shook his head subtly. She's just staff, he said. No calls. No contacts. Min-jae nodded, satisfied. Across the room, Nia slipped behind the bar. Her hands trembled now, just slightly. She wiped them on a towel and forced herself to keep moving. She had done what she could. Or so she told herself. Min-jae lifted his glass. To timing, he said dryly. The men laughed. At the entrance, the door opened again. A man stepped inside. Well-dressed. Unremarkable. Calm. He didn't look toward Min-jae's table. But as he passed the bar, he adjusted his sleeve. Nia saw it. A subtle movement. A signal. Her breath caught. Min-jae missed it entirely. The music stopped first. Not abruptly, just a half-second hiccup. A skipped beat. Something most people wouldn't notice if they weren't already uneasy. Nia noticed. So did the man who had just entered. He reached the center of the room and paused, pretending to check his phone. Min-jae raised his glass again. That was when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And then. The sound. A sharp crack that didn't belong in a restaurant. For half a second, no one screamed. People didn't understand yet. They were still deciding whether what they'd heard was real. Then the second crack came. Closer. Glass exploded somewhere near the entrance. Someone shouted. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Chaos tore through the room like a living thing. Down! Someone yelled in Korean. Min-jae was on his feet instantly, training overriding disbelief. His chair slammed backward as one of his men reached for him, pulling him down behind the table. Gunfire erupted. Not wild. Controlled. Precise. The sound punched through the air, louder indoors, echoing off marble and glass. Diners screamed now, dropping to the floor, crawling beneath tables, knocking over drinks that spilled like blood across white cloths. Nia ducked behind the bar as a bottle shattered inches from her head. Her ears rang. Her heart hammered so hard it felt like it might break her ribs. She pressed herself flat against the cabinets, forcing her breathing to slow, to steady. Think. This was the moment she had been afraid of. Across the room, Min-jae barked orders. Cover the exits. Move, move. One of his men collapsed, clutching his shoulder, blood soaking into his suit. Another dragged him behind an overturned table. The attackers moved fast. Too fast. They weren't firing blindly. They weren't panicking. They were advancing. Min-jae peeked over the table edge, eyes scanning. The man at the bar, the one Nia had watched all night, was gone. So was the man who'd entered moments earlier. Realization slammed into him like a physical blow. This wasn't an ambush. It was an extraction. They're inside already, Min-jae snapped. Fall back. He moved toward the service hallway instinctively. Toward cover. Toward. His eyes caught movement behind the bar. Nia. She was crouched low, hands pressed to the floor, eyes wide but focused. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't frozen. She was watching. Min-jae felt something twist sharply in his chest. She knew. She had known. The words on the receipt burned in his mind now, painfully clear in retrospect. Wrong door. A deafening crack shattered the mirror behind the bar. Nia flinched as glass rained down, slicing her arm. She bit back a cry and crawled toward the end of the counter. A man vaulted over the bar from the opposite side, one of Min-jae's men, panic in his eyes. "Stay down," he shouted. He fired blindly toward the dining room. A return shot dropped him instantly. His body hit the floor less than a foot from Nia. She recoiled, breath hitching, hands slick with someone else's blood. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. She crawled again, heart pounding, ears ringing, mind screaming, "Move, move, move." Min-jae shouted something she couldn't hear over the noise. Another explosion of sound. A table overturned violently. Someone screamed and then went silent. Time fractured. Moments stretched, collapsed, overlapped. Nia reached the service hallway and stumbled to her feet, half running, half sliding as she pushed through the swinging door. Behind her, the dining room erupted again. Shouts, gunfire, chaos feeding on itself. She didn't stop. Didn't look back. She reached the back corridor and froze. Two men stood there. Not Min-jae's. They wore dark jackets, faces calm, eyes alert. One raised a hand gently. "Easy," he said. She stopped. Hands raised. Blood dripping from her elbow. "I don't," she began. "We know," the man said. "You warned him." Her breath caught. "How?" "We were listening too." Another gunshot thundered from the dining room. The men exchanged a glance. "Go," one said, stepping aside. "Out the back. Now." Nia hesitated. "What about now?" She ran. The back door burst open into cold night air. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, too far to help. She didn't slow until she reached the alley. Only then did she stop, bracing herself against the brick wall, gasping for air. Inside, the chaos continued. Min-jae staggered as another man fell beside him. "This isn't possible," someone shouted. "They're everywhere." Min-jae scanned the wreckage. The overturned tables, the blood, the empty bar. "Nia," he said aloud. No answer. He looked again. She was gone. The realization hit harder than the gunfire. She hadn't been caught in the crossfire. She'd escaped it. Min-jae's hands shook as he reached for his phone again. Still no signal. Outside, the sirens grew louder. Min-jae looked toward the service hallway one last time. And for the first time that night, he felt it. Fear. The sirens arrived too late to matter. By the time the first police cars screeched to a stop outside the Lotus Room, the damage had already been done. Broken glass littered the floor like ice. Tables lay overturned. Blood stained the white cloths in irregular patterns no amount of bleach would ever remove. Min-jae sat with his back against the wall, breathing hard. Two of his men were gone. One was being loaded onto a stretcher. The rest stood in tight formation around him, shaken, scanning the room with hollow eyes. Control had evaporated. What remained was survival. An officer approached him cautiously, hand resting near his weapon. "Sir, we need you to stand." Min-jae complied slowly, smoothing his jacket out of habit even now. The gesture felt pointless. As he stood, his gaze drifted toward the back hallway. Empty. The waitress was gone. That fact gnawed at him more than the attack itself. Because attacks could be answered. But disappearances meant intention. Outside, flashing lights washed the alley in red and blue. Nia stood just beyond the perimeter, wrapped in a gray emergency blanket, her bleeding arm bandaged hastily by a paramedic. She looked smaller like this. Quieter. Less like a threat. That illusion lasted exactly 3 seconds. A black sedan rolled up behind the police cruisers, unmarked, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. It didn't use sirens. Didn't rush. It didn't need to. Two men stepped out. Not armed openly. Not in uniforms. Their posture alone told the story. They approached Nia. The paramedic stepped back without being asked. "Ma'am," one of the men said calmly. "We're ready." Nia nodded. She handed the emergency blanket back to the paramedic, squared her shoulders, and walked with them toward the sedan. No hesitation. No fear. Inside the restaurant, Min Jae was answering questions with clipped irritation, carefully avoiding anything incriminating. He had done this before. He knew the routine. Then he saw her. Through the shattered glass at the front of the building. Nia stepped into view, flanked by the two men. She wasn't wearing the apron anymore. Her posture had changed. Her eyes were steady. Min Jae froze. The officer noticed. "You know her." Min Jae didn't answer. He watched as the men opened the back door of the sedan. Not for themselves, but for her. She paused before getting in, turned, and looked directly at him. This time, there was no politeness in her expression. No deference. Just understanding. The kind that came from being 10 steps ahead. Min Jae's throat went dry. The door closed. The sedan pulled away. Only then did Min Jae realize something critical. No one had stopped her. No one had questioned her. No one had asked her for a statement. She wasn't a witness. She was a variable already accounted for. Later, much later, Min Jae sat alone in an interview room, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. His reflection stared back at him from the two-way mirror. A man entered. Older. Calm. Korean. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "You underestimated her," the man said. Min Jae's jaw tightened. "She was a waitress," he replied. The man smiled faintly. "That was her job," he said. "Not her role." Min Jae said nothing. "You spoke freely around her," the man continued, "because you believed she was beneath notice." Min Jae looked away. "She wasn't," the man said. "She was embedded." The word landed with weight. "Embedded," Min Jae repeated quietly. "Yes," the man said. "For 18 months. Min Jae's mind raced. That was impossible. He would have known. Wouldn't he? She spoke Korean fluently, the man continued. She logged patterns, behaviors, timelines. Min Jae clenched his fists. "She warned you," the man said, "because collateral was not part of her mandate." Min Jae laughed bitterly. "She warned me so I could escape?" The man shook his head. "She warned you," he said, "so you would stay." Silence fell between them. "You chose not to listen," the man added. "That was your misjudgment." Min Jae's chest tightened painfully now. "What does it cost me?" he asked. The man stood. "Everything you thought was stable," he replied. "And everyone who thought you were untouchable." He turned toward the door. "One more thing," he said, pausing. "She was never just a waitress." The door closed. Min Jae sat alone. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The note. The timing. The wrong door. She hadn't been reacting. She'd been guiding. And by the time he realized it, it was far too late. Power didn't leave Min Jae all at once. It drained slowly. That was the cruelest part. The first thing he lost was certainty. In the days following the incident at the Lotus Room, Min Jae was moved between locations without explanation. Interview rooms with no clocks. Cars with darkened windows. Faces that watched him without revealing anything in return. No threats. No deals. Just silence. Silence was worse than violence. Violence could be answered. Silence meant decisions were already being made elsewhere. He replayed the night again and again in his head. The moment she paused. The the moment she spoke, the moment he chose not to listen. Each time, the outcome remained the same. Too late. His phone was returned to him on the third day. It was lighter than he remembered. No missed calls from the people who used to fill his screen. No messages asking for guidance. No updates. The network had gone quiet. Min-jae scrolled anyway, his thumb moving out of habit. Names blurred together. Men who owed him loyalty. Men who had built their power beside his. Men who were now distancing themselves. Some had already disappeared. Others had begun talking. Min-jae felt something hollow open inside his chest. Power wasn't taken from him. It abandoned him. Elsewhere, Nia sat in a room that looked nothing like an interrogation space. Soft lighting. Neutral walls. A table with 2 chairs. No restraints. No pressure. Just a question. "How far do you want this to go?" the woman across from her asked. Nia considered the question carefully. She had learned to. "How far does it need to?" she replied. The woman studied her for a moment. "That depends on you." Nia looked down at her hands. The cut on her arm was healing. The bruise on her ribs would fade. Physical damage always did. The rest lingered longer. She thought about the people in the restaurant. The screams. The body on the floor behind the bar. She thought about Min-jae's face when realization finally reached him. Not fear. Understanding. "I didn't start this," Nia said quietly. "No," the woman agreed. "But you're positioned to end it." Nia exhaled slowly. Ending things was harder than surviving them. Days passed. Information moved. Pieces fell. Min-jae watched as the structure he'd spent decades building collapsed from the inside. Accounts frozen. Properties seized. Names exposed. People who had once bowed their heads now refused to meet his eyes. The final meeting came without ceremony. A man entered his room. Younger than he expected. "Come. It's finished," the man said. Min-jae nodded. He had known this moment was coming. "What happens to me?" he asked. The man considered him. "That depends on what you still believe you deserve." Min-jae laughed softly. The sound surprised even him. "I thought power meant protection," he said. The man shook his head. "Power meant visibility. You mistook the two." Min-jae's smile faded. He thought of Nia. Of how easily he had dismissed her. "She made a choice," he said. "Didn't she?" "Yes," the man replied. "And?" Min-jae pressed. The man paused. "She chose not to destroy you," he said. "Only to stop you." That hurt more than any sentence could have. Nia stood at the edge of the city days later, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. Traffic moved below her. Ordinary. Unaware. She felt older than she had before. Not tired. Resolved. Her phone buzzed once. A message. "It's done." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned it off. Min-jae was transferred quietly. No headlines. No spectacle. Just absence. The kind that left a vacuum others rushed to fill. In the end, what remained of him wasn't fear. It was irrelevance. Nia returned to the Lotus Room one last time. The windows were boarded up. The sign removed. The illusion dismantled. She stood there for a moment, remembering how small she had made herself in that space. How necessary it had been. How temporary. She walked away without looking back. She didn't need invisibility anymore. Min-jae sat alone in his final room, staring at a blank wall. For the first time in his life, no one was listening. No one was afraid. No one cared what he thought. He closed his eyes and understood the true cost of his mistake. Stories like this are usually told from the wrong angle. They focus on the men with power, the violence, the collapse. They turn consequences into spectacle. But that night at the Lotus Room was never really about gunfire or blood or broken glass. It was about assumption. Min Jae had built his life on a simple belief that power was visible, that it announced itself through money, language, fear, that the world arranged itself around men like him because it always had. And for a long time, he had been right. He had walked into rooms and watched conversations bend around his presence. He had spoken freely because silence followed him like a shadow. He had dismissed those who served him because service, to him, meant submission. That belief had never failed him. Until it did. Because the waitress had never tried to challenge him. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't threatened him, she hadn't exposed him. She had simply listened. And listening, in a world built on arrogance, was more dangerous than force. Nia understood something Min Jae never did. That power didn't always sit at the center of the table. Sometimes it moved quietly along the edges. Sometimes it wore uniforms. Sometimes it carried plates and kept its head down. Sometimes it waited. She had survived by being underestimated. By letting people talk. By letting them believe they were alone even when they weren't. And when the moment came, she didn't act out of revenge. She acted out of restraint. She warned him, not to save him, but to give him a choice. That was the irony. Min Jae had been offered mercy by someone he never believed capable of delivering judgment. And he rejected it. Because men like him didn't believe warnings came from waitresses. They believed danger looked like them. In the months that followed, the story faded from public memory. Restaurants reopened. Tables were replaced. New music filled the silence. The world moved on. Min Jae became a name people stopped saying out loud. Then a name people forgot altogether. Not because he was innocent, but because he was finished. Nia didn't disappear. She just stopped being visible. There's a difference. She carried the night with her, not as trauma, but as confirmation. Confirmation that she had been right to trust her instincts. Right to act when no one else could. Right to understand that morality wasn't about destruction. It was about timing. She never returned to that restaurant job. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she no longer needed it. She had played her role perfectly, and then she had stepped out of it. That was the part Min Jae never anticipated. That the waitress was temporary. That the silence was intentional. That the woman he humiliated had already outgrown the room. In the end, the most devastating thing Min Jae lost wasn't his empire. It was his certainty. The certainty that told him he could always tell who mattered. That belief had kept him safe for decades. And it destroyed him in one night. Because the truth was simple. They didn't lose because she was powerful. They lost because they never bothered to look. And by the time the Korean Mafia boss finally understood who she was, by the time he realized she had been listening the entire time, by the time he learned the truth, it was already too late.